Protesters continue to mobilize in Chile despite heavy police repression. The United Nations addresses the blockade on Cuba at the 27th plenary session of the General Assembly. And thousands left homeless after heavy rains caused floods in South Sudan. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Stefania Bravo and this is from the South. Protesters continue to pour onto Chile's streets despite police repression. Demonstrators who answered the call to mobilize in the major port city of Valparaiso were blasted with a high-powered water cannon as police tried to disperse the crowd. The police were also deployed near the Costanera shopping center in the capital city Santiago, where another demonstration took place. Protests have gripped the country for the past 3 weeks to demand an end to deeply entrenched inequality.
We have come here to present a criminal complaint against the head of the police and the interior minister because we have been subjected to spying and intimidation. These practices remind us of the times of the civic military dictatorship. These acts happened during the events marking the International Day of Imprisoned and Missing People, hosted by the University of Chile.
At least 2 kidnappings by the Chilean police have also been denounced in the last few hours. However, prosecutors said these were normal police operations which did not follow proper procedures. Meanwhile, a demonstration was called by Mapuche indigenous groups in one of Santiago's main squares. As we see in this video, the Mapuche surrounded a statue of the Spanish conquistador Pedro de Valdivia and dropped it with a Moving on, at the United Nations General Assembly, the first day of the debate on the need to lift the U.S. blockade against Cuba has ended. The 27th plenary meeting of the Assembly will vote on Thursday on Cuba's resolution to end the economic, commercial, and the financial blockade. The draft resolution reaffirms the sovereign equality of states, non-intervention, and non-interference in internal affairs. It specifically highlights the impact of the application of the Helms-Burton Act and the international community's rejection of the blockade. While condemning Washington's coercive attacks, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, through its permanent UN representative Inga Rhonda King, praised Cuba for its continued assistance to UN member states.
The majority of members of this organization have profited from Cuba's invaluable assistance, solidarity, and support in areas of healthcare and humanitarian assistance. Cuba's contribution to underserved areas in the world is unparalleled and was typified with its role in the fight against Ebola in Africa. This economic, commercial, and financial blockade against the indomitable Cuban people was wrong at the time of its implementation, and 6 decades later, it remains unjustifiable and unlawful.
And speaking on behalf of the non-aligned movement, Azerbaijan's representative to the UN, Yashar Aliyev, said the blockade must be unconditionally lifted as it is in violation of the United Nations Charter and the principles of international law.
In this regard, the non-aligned movement seizes this opportunity to reiterate once again its strongest opposition to the promulgation and imposition of unilateral coercive measures that are not authorized by relevant organs of the United Nations and that are inconsistent with the principles of international law or the Charter of the United Nations, given their extraterritorial implications and illegal character. The non-aligned movement has repeatedly reiterated its call to the U.S. government to put an end to the unilateral economic, commercial, and financial embargo that it has illegally imposed against Cuba for almost 6 decades now. The embargo, which is a breach of international law, the Charter of the United Nations, and the norms and principles governing interstate relations, constitutes a violation of Cuba's right to fully interact with the international community. Mr. President, the non-aligned movement has historically maintained a principled position in rejecting unilateral coercive measures that are not authorized by relevant organs of the United Nations, that are inconsistent with the principles of international law or the Charter of the United Nations, or that contravene the basic principles of the multilateral trading system and that are used as a tool of political or economic and financial pressure against states, especially developing countries.
Meanwhile, South Africa's permanent UN representative Jerry Magila has pointed out that the U.S. aggression against Cuba has been accelerated by the Trump administration, as the previous one, led by Barack Obama, showed much more willingness to engage in dialogue and lift sanctions.
The window of opportunity had opened up briefly for the normalization of diplomatic relations and relaxation of embargo under the previous administration. U.S. administration had regrettably reversed, with the imposition of further stringent sanctions against Cuba. As a result, the Cuban people are once again faced with a monumental obstacle towards the fulfillment of their national development goals and attainment of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In this regard, South Africa has noted with concern the escalation of U.S. aggression against Cuba and the region and the rolling back of the previous U.S. administration policy of engagements with Cuba.
In other news now, Venezuela's Communications Minister Jorge Rodriguez has presented new evidence of collusion between opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó and the Colombian drug trafficking group Los Rastrojos. Rodriguez is accusing Guaidó of turning a blind eye to the paramilitary group's drug trafficking operation through Venezuela's border with Colombia in exchange for their services.
There's evidence that links armed robbery committed by coup perpetrators from Venezuela's far-right parties and the Colombian paramilitary group. Juan Guaidó should stop blabbering and explain how he dared to even think about handing over the western border to a Colombian CR.
Social movements and the Bolivian government have ratified their decision to defend the democratic process and the results of the October 20th presidential election. They also reject the opposition's attempts to foment a coup d'etat. Let's have a look.
Social movements, including those of miners, campesinos, neighborhood groups and workers, have again protested against opposition violence and failure to accept the results of the recent election in Bolivia.
They have never spoken to us to see if we were in agreement with the civic strike. They have imposed their strike on us. When our brothers and sisters in the unions want to work, they send vandals to damage businesses and beat them.
The Bolivian Workers' Center has called on the authorities to restore normality in the face of the pressure pushed by civic committees across the country.
There can be no confrontation between colleagues when some are inciting violence, no burning of campaign bases, no burning of state institutions or our union buildings. We can't accept that.
President Morales said that by alleging fraud, the opposition are pushing a coup d'etat.
If one is sure that fraud has been committed, they'd be happy to take all the necessary evidence to international organisms. As they have no proof, now they are pushing a coup. The call to strike is a coup. Sisters and brothers, we can't let ourselves be provoked. We are of peace struggle. They are always trying to provoke us.
The president called on citizens to defend social achievements, economic stability, and the development plan and industrialization underway from the opposition, who are trying to drag the country backwards.
In order to get to where we are, the workers democratically took back their country and built a new Bolivia. Now the opposition want to destroy what we have created with so much effort, so much struggle. You know the sacrifices made by the workers.
Before the October 20th elections, the opposition announced that they wouldn't accept the result if Evo Morales won. The argument they're using is of supposed fraud, but they're refusing to show any evidence to international experts conducting an audit of the electoral process.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Who's moving the chess man? What interests motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back to From the South. Drug violence continues to leave a trail of death in Mexico. On Tuesday, 9 North American Mormons, including 6 children, were murdered in the northern border states of Chihuahua and Sonora. The White House was quick to respond.
Mexico's Secretary of Public Safety and Citizen Protection, Alfonso Durazo, gave details of the violent attacks near the U.S. border, which left 3 women and 6 children dead. 8 children survived, 5 of them with bullet wounds.
Their convoy of 2 SUVs may be mistakenly targeted by criminal gangs.
The victims were all from the Levarón family, part of a Mormon community which settled in Mexico decades ago and lived in a remote area of Chihuahua State. Their dual nationality drew an immediate response from President Donald Trump. He tweeted, "This is the time for Mexico, with the help of the United States, to wage war on the drug cartels and wipe them off the face of the earth. We merely await a call from your great new president." And the Mexican president also answered immediately.
This is a matter that we, the government of Mexico, have to deal with in an independent way, maintaining respect for our sovereignty. We thank President Trump very much indeed.
López Obrador stressed that this case had to be dealt with in line with the Constitution, and that no other government can intervene on Mexican territory unless there is a cooperation agreement and an explicit request from the Mexican government, a sign of how relations have changed compared with previous administration.
What we had before was not cooperation in matters of security, but total subordination. Calderón put national security in the hands of the U.S. authorities, the DEA, the CIA, and the State Department. He handed over all information on security to the government of the United States.
The Mexican government has demanded cooperation from the United States to stop illegal arms trafficking. 70% of the drug cartel's weapons enter from the north. There is also the issue of reducing the consumption of illicit substances in the north, something in which the United States government has invested very little.
The highly anticipated auction of drilling rights to 4 deep sea oil fields in Brazil has brought a lower bid than expected. The auction only managed to rise $17 billion against $26 billion the Brazilian government hoped for. The windfall marked yet another blow to Jair Bolsonaro's far-right government, which is already struggling to revive the country's economy. The auction comes after Bolsonaro's recent push for the Latin American country to be included in the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. In the Caribbean, Barbados Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley says Liat Airline is doomed if the regional carrier is only left to 4 shareholder governments to keep it afloat. She says other Caribbean nations need to chip in to sustain the airline's route if they wanted to facilitate their countries. This comes as Antigua and Barbuda secured a $15 million loan from the Alba Bank to inject into the cash-strapped airline.
What we have done is to place the burden of LIAT only on the shareholders without recognizing that routes cannot be sustainable unless they're either financially profitable or economically desirable. If they are financially profitable, there is no issue, because the profit is after you've taken into account all of your payments, including the payments that governments are now paying now for the planes. If it is economically desirable, then we need to be able to have a minimum revenue guarantee such that once the load factor of particular routes falls below whatever the agreed average is, be it 65% or 63% or 60%, governments who want to sustain those routes say, I will pay the difference between the two.
The local arts industry has suffered a blow as Jamaican veteran filmmaker Franklin Chappie St. Just has died. St. Just passed away on Tuesday after ailing for some time. Culture Minister Olivia Grange reacted to the news, remembering St. Just for his invaluable contribution to film, not only in Jamaica but the wider Caribbean region. She said he was a masterful at stage and lighting and was a brilliant filmmaker, television producer, and a teacher. The University of the West Indies Mona campus, where he once taught, also offered condolences, praising him for his colossal influence in the media and creative arts industries. Dominica's Prime Minister has revealed that the country's upcoming general elections, which will take place as early as next month, with a nomination day on November 19th. As such, the Prime Minister advised the President to dissolve the Parliament this Wednesday.
His Excellency, the President of the Commonwealth of Dominica. To dissolve the Parliament of Dominica. Tomorrow, Wednesday, the 6th of November, 2019. The date on which Dominicans shall go to the polls and choose between transformation and change they can see versus talk and inexperience, between experience and experimenting, between safety versus uncertainty, is Friday, the 6th of December 2019.
Moving on, thousands of people have been left homeless after continued heavy rains triggered floods in most parts of South Sudan. The rising floodwaters have caused a significant infrastructure destruction and left thousands of people displaced. The country has already declared a national emergency last week after floods forced almost 500,000 people to flee their homes. Some residents say they are afraid of being affected by diseases as they are living near water holes full of waste and dead animals.
We are trying to find different places, but the water apparently is still increasing in this area. Now we are at the airstrip, which we are losing about 40 centimeters per day every day, where the water is increasing. There is a very high humanitarian need of an intervention, especially with shelter material, with NFI kits, with material that can be given to the population, because people have lost everything. They lost their homes, so the intervention is very needed in this sector.
Government workers in Zimbabwe have staged a strike against deteriorating living conditions due to low salaries. Police in Harare dispersed civil service workers who were protesting over austerity measures put in place by the government in its efforts to cope up with the struggling economy. The workers have been demonstrating for weeks now, calling on the government to review salaries, which they say have been rendered valueless by rising inflation.
Imagine you can't even pay for the school fees of your own children for this the institution that you are teaching, which is just a mockery. So we have got a number of issues which are affecting us.
We need a restoration of the value of our salaries to the pre-October 2018 position, where the lowest paid civil servant was earning $475.
Still in Zimbabwe, a prolonged drought is killing more animals in the country's national parks. According to the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority, almost 60 elephants have died in the country's largest wildlife reserve, Hawanji National Park, in the last 2 months. The drought has made it difficult for animals to access food and water. As such, animals have been forced to stray into villages, ultimately wreaking havoc.
It's beginning to be serious, since the water level on most pens is decreasing. So it might be worse with time if the rains if you fail to receive the first rains in October or early November. This might be serious.
We have a problem here whereby hungry wild animals from Mapuche National Park are attacking our livestock. We have elephants, lions and hyenas coming here to the villages to even destroy our crops. The problem won't end, because every time we tell the national parks officials that we have a problem with their animals, they just come and take their animals and won't give us a solution. So if we attack their animals here, they get us arrested.
Coming up, Israeli authorities bow to pressure to free 2 Jordanian citizens illegally detained for months. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The head of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees has called it quits amid an investigation into alleged mismanagement and ethical abuses at the organization. A UN spokesperson announced that Pierre Krabenhul has resigned with immediate effect. While preliminary findings of the probe excluded fraud or misappropriation of funds, it did identify management-related issues that need to be addressed. The agency assists more than 5 million Palestinian refugees in various countries, but has been struggling with budgeting issues since last year when the U.S., its biggest donor, halted its aid for $360 million per year.
At this time, it is vital that member states and other partners remain committed to the agency and the services it provides. It is also critical for the international community to support the crucial work performed by the agency in the areas of health, education, and humanitarian assistance, which is a source of stability in a volatile region.
Israeli authorities have vowed to pressure to free 2 Jordanian citizens they've illegally detained for more than 2 months. Hiba Labdi and Abdul Rahman Miri were released from a Tel Aviv jail on Wednesday after being detained in August and September respectively. They were arrested after crossing into the West Bank to attend families' events. Israel accused them of committing security offenses but failed to specify the exact crimes. Last week, Jordan withdrew its ambassador from Tel Aviv in protest against the pair's imprisonment.
The experience of being imprisoned was generally difficult. We thank God that we were released. The blackmail and cowardice of the Zionist occupation led to them to use various techniques, from psychological measures to threats, to make one feel isolated from the world. But thank God we received news that our people were standing behind us. The Jordanian envoy to Israel was also in communication with us from day one, as instructed by His Majesty the King. We felt like we had a support system, and thank God we are now with our brothers and family.
As protests continue in Iraq, security forces once again opened fire to disperse crowds gathered on a bridge in central Baghdad. Live rounds were fired in the air, however, there appear to be no casualties. Anti-government protesters are seeking an entire regime change, with demonstrations taking place in the capital and the southern provinces. In the last 24 hours, at least 13 protesters were killed. The death toll is well over 250, but the government agencies have stopped releasing figures. Weeks after U.S. President Donald Trump said that his troops would leave Syria, close to 500 U.S. soldiers and 55 armored trucks illegally entered Syrian territory through Iraq. Damascus has said that the reason for being there is to control Syrian oil fields.
U.S. troops have set up a new military base in the northeast of Syria's Hasaka province and are preparing to set up another one to the east of the Deir ez-Zor province. In these areas, U.S. troops, along with Kurdish militants, patrol Syrian oil fields to allegedly protect them from Daesh terrorists.
By keeping this smaller contingent of troops in Syrian land, the US is hoping to complete their plan to steal Syrian oil from the region's oil fields. We believe this is a plan to make themselves look better in front of US citizens ahead of next year's presidential elections.
This happens after Kurdish separatist militias were abandoned by Washington and had to leave the area near Turkey's border, where Russia and Turkey carry out joint patrols. But even after this betrayal, these militant groups continue to help Washington with their plans, as they allegedly receive over $30 million per month from Syria's stolen oil.
The joint patrols between Turkey and Russia are temporary until the Syrian Arab Army is able to deploy forces to this border area, in accordance with the 1981 UN resolution, which forbids the violation of any nation's borders by another nation.
Meanwhile, the Syrian Arab Army has sent reinforcements to the border with Turkey to try to put an end to the presence of US troops in these regions.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Until next time.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality.